Okay, welcome aboard. It's November 14th. It's a Sunday, and hopefully some people are getting out and doing some flying. Today we're talking about personal flight minimums, which is something that I think all flight instructors teach pretty religiously. So this goes for new students and older students or experienced pilots alike. So this is a good topic to review. We'll take a look at a couple different things today, but first we're going to talk about setting up some weather minimums for yourself. So when we talk about weather minimums, we're talking about setting up some limits on what you're going to fly in and then sticking to those limits. And some ideas with that would be wind limits, obviously, and that can be both wind down the runway and a crosswind limit. Of course, the aircraft has its own limit, but that doesn't mean that you have to always abide by that. If you're new to the airplane, if it's a tailwheel aircraft, for example, you might set your limit at 5 knots or maybe no crosswind at first, just before you get your feet under yourself. So it's kind of a good way to work your way up. And then ceiling and visibility limits are also good to place on yourself, especially if you're a VFR only pilot. It kind of keeps you from getting yourself into trouble. If you always set some conservative limits, then you won't wander into things that you shouldn't be in. That is, if you stick to your limits, of course. So make sure that the limits that you set, you religiously stick to them. Otherwise, there's no purpose to setting a limit if you're not going to follow it. So visibility, cloud, and wind limits are good ideas for weather. And that can also tie to the type of aircraft you're flying too. So we'll take a look at that now. So aircraft limits are also important. You may have 500 hours in your personal tailwheel aircraft, for example, or your personal 172. But then you get access to another aircraft for whatever reason, and you may have different limits for that as well. So you may, depending on your experience and time in the aircraft, need to set different weather minimums for what you're going to fly in. You may have different mission limits. For example, if you're not really comfortable with working all the radios yet in the airplane, you may not fly into a Class C airport with the aircraft until you're comfortable switching radios and working all the, depending on if it's like a glass cockpit or something like that. And then maintenance. You definitely want to have some limits on that. What will you fly with? What won't you fly with? And obviously, common sense comes into play there. So, and then just the weather aircraft combo, like I said before. You may have some limits to set based on what type of aircraft it is that handles crosswind well or not well, depending on the aircraft. Things like that. So it's okay to have minimums for each type of aircraft. And the final point I wanted to make is that once you have set your minimums and you've flown several hours at those minimums and you're feeling good about it, bump them up, and then that's how you expand your comfort zone and your experience level without getting into trouble. So if your crosswind component limit was 5 knots, and you're able to do that every time without trouble, it may be time to bump that up to 8 knots or 10 knots or whatever you want to go to. But then stick to that level again until you're completely comfortable. And by doing that, you expand your comfort envelope, and you never get into trouble because you're always right in that place that you need to be. So that is kind of my speech on personal minimums. I preach them big time with new students and students that I'm working with that are getting back into flying or getting into a new aircraft. And it tends to keep people out of trouble. So we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks for visiting.